Okay, so first of all, thanks a lot to the CAISP community and also to PayPal for hosting and the planning of excellent event on a Saturday morning, where it's an opportunity to share our knowledge and also learn from other leaders. Right? So, very excited to be part of this. And as a speaker, I wanted to talk about cloud AI security provisioning. Right? So with the background that Michael gave on the different ways to secure AI and also use AI for cyber security. So I was really thinking about where to start and what should be my session on. And that's when I thought that we talk about AI. Why not talk about the intersection of AI and cloud? Because that's where most of our AI services are sitting, right? So we have providers like AWS, Azure, everyone using or providing AI services to us. And we are using these services day in, day out, right? We are using them as a platform, we are using them to build applications, and then this is the main starting point of AI, right? So while this is also the starting point of AI, this is where also the problems start, right? And that's why I thought that it is important for us to look at it and see how we can go through the basics of this. So what I'm going to cover is only basics of how to start with the secure provisioning, how we are going to start using AI, and how it helps solve many problems from a cybersecurity perspective. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So so quickly looking at the pillars of cloud AI security, right? I think it's very similar to the pillars that we have in cybersecurity itself. And these are, while I've called them out as separate tiles, these are all interconnected, and if you double click into each one of them, I think it can take us multiple days and multiple meetups to cover these topics. Right? So it starts with network security and then followed by data security, how we protect the data, IAM security, I think the most important topic from Zero Trust perspective, and then service hardening, which is the unifying factor amongst all these domains is the service hardening, which we will go through in detail. And finally, logging and audit, I think the importance is too high with respect to logging, especially with AI coming in. And finally, LLM guardrails, which is very specific to AI. Right? So these are the main top pillars, I would say, from security perspective. And to add to that, what cannot be left out is the last one. The last one is the automated threat detection and response. Right? So you look at it, we cannot be in still the old age where we have a SOC team who's just getting logs and then they start a bridge call to analyze the logs, engage stakeholders, and then try to remediate, right? By this duration, the hacker would have already compromised a lot, got the necessary privileges, and the data might have gone, right? So it is also we are in a stage where you are not just detecting, you are able to detect and you are also able to remediate automatically. And this is where AI plays a crucial role, where you use AI for cybersecurity while protecting AI itself. Right, so these are the top layers. In the next 15-20 minutes, I'm going to go through service hardening, which is the most crucial part for the secure provisioning, right? And how many of you would have, in your cybersecurity process, learned about hardening? Just raise your hands. Great, right? I think hardening is the most common topic that every person goes through when you talk about cybersecurity, right? And if you look at our basics, they start with OS hardening, they start with network hardening, they start with all these basics, right? But when you go through this concept of service hardening, you have to take it to every step and every layer across the stack, right from your infrastructure, your OS, to even to your application, to your network, and every stack. which means that you also have to harden your AI, right? If you don't harden your AI, then you start with the problems already because you are not protecting it, right? And that's why I would also call service hardening as a security by design approach, where you start at the beginning itself and not wait for it to go live and detect something later in production when a compromise happens. So moving to the next section. So again, I will categorize the service hardening into multiple buckets, and that's why at the beginning I said the service hardening is kind of a unifying factor with the other pillars of cybersecurity which I just showed, right? Because if you don't consider these other domains like IAM, network, data, logs, so you will not be able to harden it properly. Only if you harden it across all the layers, you are able to have a proper secure approach and use it securely, right? So while I've given some examples on what they are, I do have some details and which we will drill down in the next few minutes. To begin with, before we go into the details, I also wanted to call out that the most crucial part, even before you begin to harden or think about hardening, is also this most important piece, which is service discovery. Right? So, how many of you have heard about shadow IP? Right? So, many of you, right? And it's the most common problem, right? Especially when you go, when we started with cloud, and as cloud matured, right? So, it was not necessary to stop with one cloud, with more regulatory demands and country-specific regulations, and also features from the different cloud service providers. Many enterprises were pushed to adopt multi-cloud, not just a single cloud. Like if you deployed on AWS, organizations also started looking at Azure or GCP or whatever is the cloud service provider, right? So in such cases, when you have a multi-cloud approach, while it gives you the benefits and scalability and the advantages, it also comes with a challenge on how do you manage the inventory. And for security, the most important thing is that you have solid inventory. The minute you don't have an inventory, you don't have visibility of what your assets are, where it is sitting. And if you don't know your assets, then how are you securing it, right? You don't get to know when there's a compromise on what is the attack surface, right? So that's why I would like to call out service discovery as the most crucial topic, which organizations need to focus on if they need to be secure. In this case, I've just called out two examples, right? This will be your entire inventory. This can be even on-premise, right? On-premise to your devices, to your cloud, to AI. Everything needs to have an inventory, have a central inventory. But here I'm just calling out examples of AWS Bedrock and Azure AI Foundry. Mainly because the focus that I'm going through is basically the AI secure provisioning. So I just called out these two examples, right? So this is what I'll be using as a reference today, and to go through how we can harden these two services. Right, so once you have a service discovery in place, next is the definition of the hardening. Right, I will cover workflow, which is coming up next, but these are the different 4 domains that I would like to focus on when I'm looking at hardening the services. Right? IAM, for example, it's with respect to least privileges, monitoring your permissions, having the governance process for your identity. Network security, like you know, it's about having no public exposure unless and until it is unavoidable. Data security, you know about encryption, customer managed keys, data labeling, and then logging, of course, having your logs, which is most crucial, forwarding them to a SIM solution so that you can actually get your threat detection up and running. One thing I would like to call out, so I'll quickly move to the next step. One thing I would like to call out with service hardening. So, while you do service hardening, what we should be careful about is, especially in the cloud and AI services, what we should understand first is, normally we get a lot of references, for example, from industry standard benchmarks like CIS, NIST, and many other frameworks. That's our main source of truth. What is also crucial is also that we refer to the vendors that provide these services in addition, right? Like the CSPs and the other vendors that provide the AI platform and AI services. Because what can be hardened is based on a shared responsibility, right? In cloud, there is always a shared responsibility where the cloud service provider is responsible for few topics, few areas of the stack, and as consumers, we are responsible for the remaining areas, right? So, if you just define something that when you don't know who's going to be responsible for, then you're not able to monitor. The crucial aspect of service hardening is that you are able to implement it and you are able to protect the service. There are also some frameworks and benchmarks that give you process level baselines. Right? They say that you should do this, you should have a, let's say for example, if you look at CIS, right? CIS would also say that your company should have a security contact in case of a compromise. Right? So if you look at this, this is a process guideline. And this can go into policies and standards. But it's not really a hardening, right? So that's why when you go through your sources of reference, which is also the vendor provided documentation, you will have to look at deriving those baselines that are implementable and monitorable, right? Because that's where your protection is, and it's not just really only about the process baselines. The process baselines are important, but there are ways to implement that, and they can have, it can be also responsibilities, but it's not the technical implementation. So that's to begin with, right? So understand your sources of truth, which I mentioned, and once you know your sources of truth, analyze what are the supported ways to harden, what kind of configurations that these services are exposed to, and what are the right settings for them, and translate them into actual measurable parameters and categorize them into the 4 pillars that I showed you. Right? So that would define how you are doing your definition of hardening. Right? So this is actually the first step where you discover, you analyze, and then based on your analysis, you are able to then kind of prepare a list, I would say, for each service that you are going to use in the AI. For example, in AI, we have OpenAI, we have AI Foundry, we have content safety, we have services, AI for image, right? So each AI service that you are going to use needs to go through this workflow where you are understanding the architecture of that AI service, understand what's your responsibility, and then build this documentation to begin with. So once you have this in place, right, then how do I implement it? That's the second stage. Right? This is where it comes to, again, 2 ways to do it. So you will have to have a way to monitor it, and gone are the days when you are just detecting the problem. You are also looking at how to prevent it. Right? So that's why I said it's security by design. We look for areas where you can prevent it upfront. And that's why in the provisioning process, you should have your security policies in place that can prevent these issues from happening. So how do you do that? So whatever is the list of baselines that you have defined, right, that should be translated into policy as a code, for example. And that policy as a code is then integrated into your provisioning pipelines. So mostly you would be using infrastructure as a code or other concepts to provision your services, your AI services like Terraform. So your preventative policy, which is policy as a code, should then integrate with your provisioning process right at the development phase itself. So that when a developer or a DevOps expert who's going to provision this service is then already being prevented from provisioning a wrong setting, right? For example, by mistake, I set the property as the endpoint of the public exposure. Right? So your policy, which will be covering this hardening baseline, would then look for this parameter and stop your provisioning in the pipeline saying that sorry, you're not allowed to proceed because you're creating a security problem. So this helps you in the initial phase itself and think about the dollars that you save when you have provisioned the right service and you are not working on security issues after going live in production. Of course, not everything can be preventative because of the way the underlying stack is, because of the tech details. You might not be able to secure everything. That's why you also need it detective. So as the pipelines progress from dev, UAT to prod, you have the monitoring which detects and then sets an alert to your monitoring system, right? And this is where you will have to integrate with tools like your ATSM tools, where your operations team is able to get an alert and they are able to immediately act upon that based on the severity that is attached. I've given some examples of using some of the native tools for your preventative and detective policies. Of course, these are not the only ones that are in scope, right? There are many vendor applications that also do it, but these are already the native options that the vendors provide along with the service for provisioning. Okay, so once you have a preventive and detective in place, right, what is also crucial is that you also have it operationalized in a way that is taking care of security, but it is also keeping your applications and the business in mind, right? Because there is always a balance that needs to be done between cybersecurity and application development, where there are few things that the technology might need you to support, which from a security perspective is a no-go IoT, right? So in such cases, what do we do? Right? This is where you need to be flexible, understand your enterprise requirements, and look at what can be the compensation controls in place. Right? If I pick an example, so a particular operations engineer during the change window needs an elevated access. Right? And this is against the concept of these privileges that we are talking about. And I don't think you can ever eliminate the problem of an elevated access. But you can always have a compensation in place by understanding what the business needs and have just-in-time provisioning like concepts enabled for them, right? In such cases, that's why you also need to have an operations process in place where you have a variance process where the developers are able to request such variances, and then you have time-based approval where you are allowing them to, exclude from preventing this baseline being implemented, so that they are able to go ahead and deliver value to the business, and at the same time, they invest back their time in security to implement a compensation for this, so that you are also securing your company. And there can be permanent exceptions also, and this goes with your risk acceptance and the risk exception categories that you have from a company perspective as a policy, which one needs to be followed. So, with this in place, with this workflow in place, in the next two slides, I have picked up two services, like I told, Bedrock and Azure OpenAI. I picked up two services where I have come up with a list of service hardening baselines, I would say, or service hardening guardrails, which I would like to share back with everyone as a take home based on my analysis and my experience of using these services. I'll quickly spend some time here, even though these are some technical areas, right? So I'll quickly spend some time here, right? So if you look at Azure OpenAI. So to begin with, right, if you look at their provisioning process, especially Azure, the way Azure handles or provides their platform is most of the times it is configurable parameters, right? So to begin with, they have a flag. For example, if you look at the network, the first one, they have a flag where each service has an option to has a toggle which says you enable public networks access or not. This is the most critical piece that one can miss if you do not have much of, especially in organizations when security is a separate organization and development is a separate organization. A developer might not have all details of what is needed from a security perspective, right? So, and many times we have seen that we have read in the news where your service was accessible over the internet, your S3 bucket was accessible over the internet, right? So, and this is one crucial fact, especially from Azure perspective, that is available for every service, and this needs to be turned off. And now the developer might come back saying that, how do I even access this service internally within myself? And that's where the next thing is with respect to private endpoints. Private endpoints provides a secure way of connection. It's more of an inbound access through which your OpenAI service can talk and ensure that it's not over the internet. There are other things, for example, like TLS, data in transit encryption. I've not called that out because, again, this is where the shared responsibility comes, because most of the times TLS is also taken care by the cloud service provider. So there are few services where they expect us to configure, but most of the times they take care. So that's why it is for us to go through that particular service architecture and determine whether this configuration is really for us, or is it under responsibility, or is it in cloud responsibility. There are some other options that are given in network. Data, the crucial part is basically that you ensure that the encryption at rest is there, and especially with customer managed key, which is, I think, every organization has it as a policy where you have control of the key, right? And the next section in data security is where it gives an example to the point that I made earlier, that the service hardening is kind of uniform or is the common base between the other pillars. Right? So, for example, OpenAI has an option where your content filters can be set on your prompts, on your outputs, on the text and image generation. Okay. If you fail to do this, if you're not able to define the right content filters, then this is where it is the first step of having your prompt injection problems, and the model positioning all starts here. If you are able to configure this well, you have, even if not 100%, you have almost reduced the impact of having those problems with prompt injection and model positioning. Right? So this normally would seem as a guardrail in LLM security from a model security perspective. But my point here is that if you are able to capture this in the service hardening process, it also meets your requirement with respect to your LLM security.
Now, very recently agents have been able to breach, right? Last 2 days, they have been able to breach.
Nowadays, this is not good, but now agents are becoming very smarter, just being used, and you don't even know that how long it's been used. So, what have you done before about this? Well, I'm sure you have done most of it.
We would have done most of it. Definitely, I'm not denying that the breaches continue to happen, right? But once you do this, and this is where your logging comes in, right? Once you have your logging in place, and you are able to have an automated detection also. So the detection and the baseline goes against together. If you're able to have a detection and then immediate response to it without a man in the middle, then that kind of reduces the scope to the risk to the minimum. Right? I wouldn't say that the compromise it's totally avoidable. I think day before yesterday we read the news about OpenAI having a problem with the compromise, right? If you look at the problem, it went back into the IAM space, where it got a higher privilege, right? So my point again is, if you have your least privilege and monitoring in place and just-in-time concepts in place, the probability of the risk would have also reduced, maybe if not fully avoided. That's why I'm trying to correlate that this is the beginning, and if you're able to do this, I think you are able to reduce the risk to the maximum extent. On a similar lines, I also have it for bedrock and agent code from an agentic AI perspective. And this again covers all the domains that I spoke about. I think with bedrock, we also have some other minute things, the way AWS exposes it, right? And again, why I call it as basics is because if you see, one crucial thing that people miss out is basically in the second baseline, right? You end up provisioning bedrock in unapproved regions also, where you are not operating. And this is one of the mostly overlooked baseline, I would say, because in the name of doing a POCs, even in a sandbox, if it has no critical confidential data, you are not following the concept of where you are deploying. Enterprise, if it's, for example, in US East or EU West, for example, you might end up provisioning in a non-approved region. And this is where even the shadowability comes into the picture, where you are not able to discover that there are resources sitting outside the approved regions. So if you have such basics covered during your provisioning process, this is where you are able to kind of secure it upfront. And Bedrock, for example, integrates with other services like S3 and DynamoDB, right? So it is also crucial for you to apply the same logic to your other services that you are using. So it's not only about protecting your AI, but it's also about where AI is interacting, and then also securing them upfront and hardening them upfront, so that overall you are able to manage the security posture at a broader level.
I have one more question. Now, shadow IT is a given, right? You have tried, I'm sure you also are trying to reduce it, but that is not going away. So, what is your recommendation of how you want to work with shadow IT and still try to communicate this?
So, shadow IT is a big problem. I think mainly if you look at it from which stack you are checking, right? So, I think so one is the infrastructure and the service discovery. The other area where shadow IT is a problem is at the SaaS layer, right? And I think that's the most talked about topic when it comes to shadow IT, because, and that's a separate topic maybe, but we have something called as SaaS security, right? It's not just about the apps that we develop, but it's also about the vendor apps that we are getting. And how are we securing that, and are we able to have even inventory to begin with? Do we have baselines for those services? I think beyond baselines also, not just baselines, because we will be able to control vendors' applications. But right from the infrastructure to SaaS, I think there are again different requirements on how to secure them. Having that defined at each stack is, I think, the first basic approach for shadow IT. It also goes back into, I think this is also a responsibility, I think a shared responsibility that cybersecurity teams have to work with your FinOps teams. Because if you look at where your other way to find out is, I think FinOps has all the budgets and the spends with respect to the cloud, right? They also have details on what is the spend, what is the spike, how much it was used, and the patterns that arise from that spike, unusual spike, is where FinOps is able to provide inputs. Right? Sometimes you might not be able to get it right from your logs, but this is where you are integrating with other layers, and your tooling is able to get that data and then integrate and look upon those patterns, send them to the threat detection engine so that they are able to correlate this data and then have an instant response based on it. Okay, so I think this the details are available in the deck, and yes, so with I did want to have a demo, but unfortunately due to time shortage, I couldn't prepare a demo. But I think I'll get an opportunity in the future where I can actually show how these baselines can be translated into policy as a code, and then run them against template infrastructure as a code pipeline, and we can see how this can be prevented or even detected, and then what is the impact based on this. Right? So with this, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I'm not sure if you open up for questions or we do that later.
Great presentation. Great presentation. Thank you. So regarding policy as a code, regarding the policy as a code, and your last slide, very insightful. How do you use the platforms like OTA or the other one, right, to convert these into something into your CI/CD pipeline as well as your AI development pipeline, right? So, how do you practically convert these and converge into identifying the risk associated and do the benchmarking from that perspective?
So, how I see, so basically there are two options, right? One is there are many vendors already providing out-of-the-box solutions. Sometimes it's not flexible, but it's a great start, right? But the approach that I have been using till now is basically if we can insulate ourselves from looking at what the APIs are exposed by the vendor service or in the cloud. Right? That is the most crucial part because each of this translate into either a config parameter or a particular relationship in an entity. Right? It's the entity that you will have to bake in and monitor against that entity. And I know that we have OPA and OPAs and other kind of tools, but this is where I would slightly think about why not using AI itself works. Right? So I think this is where AI for security comes into picture, where if we are able to have AI agents able to monitor these configurations, translate them into agents scanning those pipelines, then it is a classic case and classic example of AI for security and cyber security for AI. And I think it can learn on its own as it discovers the enhancements to the vendor do. And you are able to control that AI agent, keeping it more internal, and then it is also able to block the pipelines. It is already work in progress. I see many enterprises doing it, but if we are still worried about the complications of AI, I think we can go back to begin with, I would go with some of the native tools that the cloud itself provides. Because what happens with the cloud is they are the first ones to develop it because they are delivering that service. So they are always in front of the game versus engineering something else. So that's how I see it. But I think it's such a vast topic that it goes back into how much time we have to do it. Can we engineer and can we spend that time, or we want to procure something so that you are able to bootstrap and deliver fast.
Hi. Hi. Hi, it was a great session. Thanks. So, I want to know one point from where you mentioned about discovery, right? From the asset inventory, making a discovery and making it an inventory is very important first to have a service happening, right? So, how do you do the discovery part? If you are using, let's say, AWS Bedrock and Agent Code, right? In that case, if you try to do discovery, asset discovery, so what is your approach or what do you follow in your organization to do asset discovery to get a proper inventory?
Okay. So I think one is, I think most of the enterprises would use CMDB, right? They would use some form of CMDB. So the crucial part is you work with your platform organization or whoever is responsible for IT to ensure that there are checks and balances to ensure that the CMDB is 100% accurate. And if that is in place, then it is up to what security tooling you are using, right, in your organization, which can connect to the CMDB, integrate that data. So it's going to be a live feed from CMDB, and your always looking at checks and balances by working with your IT. Use that data as your security element, so that it matches with what 100% with what your IT is delivering. And then today we have multiple capabilities, like you have graphs, right? Graph solutions for cybersecurity, right? And these graph solutions are able to ingest this telemetry, the asset inventory. They are also able to ingest data from the cloud, and they are able to marry this data to arrive at the actual attack surface posture. So this is where it is heading to, and cyber graph is becoming one of the most key important topics. So if you are able to find such a solution, which many vendors don't provide today, that where they provide integration, for example, ServiceNow is your CMP, right? They provide out-of-the-box integrations. So that job is taken care of for them, right? But it is for you to work with your IT to ensure that your CMP is available. If not, then you are always at loss of data. Okay, so I think that's the most crucial piece that is.
So just a follow-up question, quick question. So will it also work for AI services? Because now a lot of AI services are also we are integrating, right?
Right.
Like one of them is like MCP servers. Finding the MCP servers, different project teams are bringing up their own MCP servers for their own use case. Now the question is, how do you discover those MCP servers?
Right. So that's where the cyber graph comes into picture, right? Because graph can talk to MCP service. Because when the seeds, these are APIs and talking to, it's a graph database, right? What you need is a little bit of data engineering on this, where you get your pipeline context, into different sources of data, and you get all the feed, and then you just have to transform data based on that. So it's not I get a point, not everything can be done in a CMDB. So you look at what your traditional assets are from CMDB, and you look at what are your latest assets. Use a graph or a similar data engineering solution that can get data from different layers, transform, and then have your own security asset database. Okay.
Thank you. So, rest of the questions we can take up during the networking break. Thank you, Pranav, for a wonderful session.